When two kids get into a fight, they typically argue over who did it in the first place in a vain attempt to not get in trouble. But as we know, that is hardly the case, as they both get in trouble for fighting in the first place. In the New York Times editorial, Mr. Trump makes a spectacle of himself. The article asserts that both sides aren't to blame, and that saying so is a false equivalency. I think that's further from the truth, as both sides need to share blame. I'm going to be refuting three main points in the article: Trump's speech, Antifa, and the very last paragraph. One of the first points made in the editorial is that on Monday, Trump said racism is evil, but yet the very next day goes on a high decibel defense saying that both sides are to blame for the violence that happened in Charlottesville and that the counter-protesters are just as capable. Now, to say that both sides didn't contribute to the violence, to me, it's not only silly, but it's also willfully ignorant. In the article recounting a day of rage, hate, violence, and death by the Washington Post, they set out a timeline in which the very beginning of the protest was peaceful. Hate-filled? Yes, but it was peaceful. But when protest met counter-protest, it then got violent from both sides. It would continue like that until the very next day, in which both sides started doing skirmishes and bringing weapons. As a Los Angeles Times article, who was responsible for violence in Charlottesville? Here's what witnesses say explained. The author explains in the next paragraph that Trump took up talking points the alt-right have, like the news not paying nearly enough attention to Antifa. While it may seem like complaining, the fact that an organization that is essentially doing its own vigilante justice is not being dealt with the same amount of criticism as a hate group is a pretty fair complaint, I think. In an interview of CNN entitled Unmasking the Antifa Movement, the leader says that the only way to speak to protesters is violence, admitting that his organization is a violent one. While when they're on the media, though, it's usually with articles like this explaining who they are and what they do, or, like its editorial, them being shielded from their actions. It takes two to tango, and it takes two violent, hate-filled groups to turn a town into a proverbial war zone. At the very end of the editorial, the author then talks about the administration, and ends by saying that the root of the problem is not the administration, but rather the man on top. While I don't even disagree with this idea, the reason why I don't think it's good is because it just doesn't add up with the rest of the editorial. It doesn't work well. It's like asking your friend about what's their favorite flavor of ice cream, but instead they go about how we're all going to die of nuclear hellfire. While that might be fun and interesting to hear, it doesn't really fit with how you asked for ice cream. Hopefully I was able to shed some light as to why some people believe that both sides need to share the blame of what happened in Charlottesville. I've explained why both extremes have helped the violence, and why criticizing groups like Antifa needs to be more common, and also why bringing up the administration when you're really talking about Trump and Charlottesville really makes no sense. As I stated at the start of the speech, when two kids get into a fight, they both get into deep trouble. Hopefully now we can start doing this with the political extremes and give these children their most needed attention.